We're going to take a look right now at the First Amendment in a little bit more detail than we have so far. There are some limitations to the First Amendment, some restrictions based on the way the courts over years have interpreted the First Amendment in a series of different cases that have come before the court. Those of you working on a project for the First Amendment will want to know and be familiar with the court's rulings in cases like Tinker v. Des Moines, New York Times v. U.S., Texas v. Johnson, Schenck v. U.S., Wallace v. Jaffrey. And these deal with a number of different key issues. First of all, recall the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment: speech, assembly, press, petition, and assembly. So you have the right to gather, you have the right to ask your government to do something it isn't currently doing, you have the freedom of religion, and you have the freedom to express yourself. There are several restrictions in terms of what this means in daily life. Let's start with freedom of speech and what we do and don't have. First of all, there's what's called the time, place, and manner restriction. Sometimes, in some places, you don't have the freedom to do and say whatever you like. For example, a classic example given is if you're in a crowded movie theater or you're in a hallway at school and you shout "fire." This is going to create panic. It's going to lead people to dangerous activity. People might run over each other. There might be pushing and shoving. So it's not legally protected speech to shout "fire" in a crowded theater. Hate speech is not protected speech if it is directed at someone. You can't threaten someone physically. All of those things would be examples of things that are not protected speech. There are a number of cases that have dealt with this issue. One of the cases that dealt with this issue is Tinker v. Des Moines. The question in Tinker v. Des Moines is whether it is acceptable to engage in your speech rights while you are in a school setting. In that case, the courts ruled that yes, as long as you're not disrupting school, you may retain your First Amendment rights and you may express your views on political issues. In other cases, the court has ruled that it is legal for the government to require a permit under certain circumstances. If you're having a mass demonstration, a march, and thousands of people will be coming, the court has ruled that the government is allowed to require you to get a permit in order to do that march because of the impact that your march is going to have on things like traffic considerations, how it will affect other people moving through the area, and the court has ruled that there may be public safety concerns. So those issues lead the court to create what's called time, place, and manner restrictions. You'll want to be familiar with Texas v. Johnson. In the Texas v. Johnson case, the court ruled that flag burning is constitutionally allowed. Many people feel that this is in bad taste, that you should not burn the American flag. It's a symbol of our country, and that it's unpatriotic to burn it. Yet, under the First Amendment, people are entitled to express their own views in their own ways. So as long as you're burning your own flag, it's something that you own, and you're not doing it on someone's property who wouldn't want you to do it, then you're permitted to burn the flag if you're on your own property or on public property. Although, of course, you couldn't do that in places like school buildings or government buildings where there would be a risk of fire. All right. Let's take a look now at the religion component of the First Amendment. You have the separation of church and state. In our country, the government is not allowed to do anything to encourage a particular religion. It's also not allowed to do anything to prevent you from practicing your own religion. The first part is the Establishment Clause. Government may not establish a religion. Government can't endorse a religion, can't push a religion on anybody. That's why it's unconstitutional for me as a teacher in a school setting to lead a prayer. It would be unconstitutional for a coach, a principal, a teacher, anyone in any official state capacity to advocate religion in any way. Now, in schools, you are allowed to learn about religion. So it's fine to have a course about comparative religion where you learn what Christianity is about, what Islam is about, what Judaism is about, what Hinduism and Buddhism are about. You learn the basic tenets of atheism. All of those are perfectly fine, but the teacher can't express a preference for any of those. At a football game, the coach can't lead a prayer. If they do, it's a violation of the law because it violates the rights of people who may not subscribe to that religion. Yet at the same time, we have the free exercise clause. The free exercise clause means that if you yourself want to bow your head for a moment before we take a test, you are allowed to do that. The teacher isn't to stop you from bowing your own head for a silent prayer if you feel like that's important to you. If students on a football field decide to join together individually and on their own for a prayer before a game, students are permitted to do that, but they can't force everyone to participate, and they can't be led by a school official. Now we have the issue, when it comes to freedom of press, of prior restraint. Sometimes the government wants to keep the media from printing something. It may be a national security concern. It may be something that's simply embarrassing to the government. Because it's hard to know exactly where we draw that line, courts have generally ruled that you cannot restrain or prevent a media company from printing something in advance. It's under very, very limited circumstances the government is able to do that. Those circumstances include if the information would jeopardize the safety of our troops who are deployed, jeopardize the safety of intelligence officials that might be undercover, things like that. You're not allowed to prevent the press from publishing something simply because it's embarrassing to the government. The press has the right and the duty to report on things that the government might not want out there, because if the government isn't doing a good job, people need to know about it. So, New York Times v. U.S. was a case in which the New York Times, during the Watergate era, when President Nixon was president, wanted to publish what were called the Pentagon Papers. Now, the Pentagon Papers were about lies that the White House, President Lyndon Johnson, had told the country regarding the beginnings of the Vietnam War. It turned out that he had not been truthful to the Congress or to the American people about the causes for war, and the New York Times got this top-secret information because it was leaked illegally by someone at the Pentagon, Daniel Ellsberg. Ellsberg sent the information to the New York Times. The New York Times was ready to print it. The government said, no, you can't print it, and they took it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that, in fact, the New York Times did have the right to print it. It doesn't matter that it was top secret. It was about the truth of how the war began. It did not reveal specific information about where our troops were deployed or battle strategies, and therefore it was acceptable for the newspaper to print it, even though it had been obtained initially through a violation of the law when Ellsberg leaked it to the press, violating his national security clearance. We have what's called a whistleblower law for somebody like that to protect them when they are doing something that's really in the national good. So Ellsberg ended up not being, he was convicted at the district level, but the Supreme Court overturned his conviction and said no, he was doing something for the good of the country needed to know this, even though we didn't want him, the government, the president and the executive branch didn't want him going public. Wallace v. Jaffrey is a separation of church and state case. Texas v. Johnson is the flag-burning case, in which Johnson was found to be constitutionally allowed to burn the flag. Schenck v. U.S., that's a case that involved the First Amendment right to petition and to distribute literature. Schenck was opposed to World War I. He wanted people to not join the draft. And in that case, the Supreme Court ruled that he was violating the national security needs of the United States. The court ruled that his attempting to get people not to join the draft inhibited or prevented the U.S. from being able to meet its national security obligations because he was trying to get people not to fight. And they found that Schenck was not legally entitled to tell people not to join the draft. They felt like he was undermining national security. And the Tinker v. Des Moines case, that is the black armband case in which the girl was found to have the right to protest in school as long as she didn't violate norms of the classroom with regard to disruption. As long as it's a quiet, non-disruptive protest, it is fine in a classroom. That's a bit on the First Amendment. I look forward to your projects, and ask me if you have any questions.